My daughter stood in my kitchen last spring, her wedding binder pressed against her chest, and said, "Dad, Mark thinks it would be less awkward if you just watched from the back. He says you don't really fit the vibe. Not invited, just tolerated." I'd paid for the venue, the catering, her dress, $90,000 anonymously because she asked and I didn't want her to feel obligated. The receipt is still in my glove box, and I'm about to walk into that country club with it. I'm not a man who makes scenes. I'm 62 years old. I spent 33 years running a construction company, building things that had to hold. I learned early that you don't fix a crack by pretending it isn't there. You mark it, you measure it, you decide if the structure can bear the weight. This wedding was supposed to be my gift to my daughter, no strings, but strings don't have to be spoken to exist. And when Mark, her fiancé, the man she chose over me, made it clear I wasn't wanted at the table, I had a choice to make. Accept it, or walk into that country club with the one thing that changes everything. But to understand why I was standing in that country club parking lot with a folded receipt in my pocket, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed that paying for a wedding meant you'd be welcome at it. Her name is Claire. She's my only child. Her mother died when Claire was 8 years old, ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by October. I raised her alone in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Street, the same house where she scraped her knee on the driveway and where I taught her to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. I ran my construction company out of a home office for the first 5 years. I was at every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every softball game where she struck out and still smiled. I thought that meant something. I thought that kind of history earned you a seat at the table. She met Mark during her junior year of college. He was from a family that had money the way some families have dust on the furniture, old, inherited, visible. His father was a corporate attorney. His mother sat on boards. They lived in a house with a circular driveway and a lawn service. I met Mark twice before the engagement. The first time, he shook my hand and looked past me at the same time. The second time, he asked what I did for a living, and when I said construction, he said, "Oh, hands-on," and then changed the subject. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself that young people are awkward, that he was nervous, that I needed to give him a chance. The engagement came in June 2 years ago. Claire called me at 9 in the evening, crying, not sad crying, happy crying. She said Mark had proposed at the Botanical Gardens, that the ring had a 2-carat diamond, that she was the luckiest girl in the world. I was happy for her. I was genuinely happy. But I also knew, in a way I couldn't articulate, that I was about to become a guest in my own daughter's life. The planning started 3 weeks later. Claire came over with a binder, 3 inches thick, color-coded tabs, printed spreadsheets. She told me the wedding was set for the following October at the Crestwood Country Club, which I later found out was Mark's family's club. The estimated cost was $140,000. I didn't flinch at the number. I'd saved well. I'd paid off my house. I had money sitting in CDs and a money market account that I'd never touched because I didn't know what else to do with it. I told Claire I wanted to contribute. She said Mark's parents were covering the rehearsal dinner and the photographer. She said there was a gap. The venue alone was $47,000. The catering was $32,000. Her dress was $9,000. I wrote a check for $60,000. Then I wrote another one for $30,000 when she mentioned the florist and the band. I gave her the money in a plain envelope with no note. I told her it was between us. She hugged me. She said I was the best dad in the world. I was not included in any subsequent wedding planning meetings. I was not asked for input on the guest list. I was not told about the food tasting or the cake tasting or the floral consultation. I assumed that was normal. I assumed weddings were about the couple and that my role was to write checks and show up and smile. I was wrong. The first sign came in early August. Claire and Mark invited me to dinner at a steakhouse downtown. I thought it was a casual visit. It was not. Mark opened the conversation by saying they had talked to a wedding coordinator and that the coordinator suggested keeping the ceremony intimate, with only the wedding party and immediate families seated in the front rows. Immediate families, Mark said, meaning parents and siblings. No grandparents, no aunts, no uncles, just the core. I nodded. That seemed reasonable. Then Mark added, and the coordinator also suggested that we do a receiving line only for the wedding party and parents, so you'd be included in that, obviously. but we're seating you in the second row behind my mom and dad. I asked why. Mark said, because your wife passed. There's no spouse for you to sit with. The coordinator said it would look odd to have a single person in the front row. It would draw attention away from Claire. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I looked at Claire. She was studying the menu like it contained advanced calculus. She didn't meet my eyes. I said, I'm not going to cause a scene, but I'd like to be in the front row. Mark said, we'll think about it. They didn't think about it. 2 weeks later, Claire sent me a text. Dad, we've decided to go with what the coordinator said. Love you. I wrote back, I understand. I did not understand. I was beginning to understand that I was being phased out. The next sign came when Claire mentioned that Mark's parents were hosting a pre-wedding brunch at their house. I asked when it was. She said, actually, Dad, it's just for the wedding party and immediate family, and Mark's mom said it might be awkward to have you there since you're the only one without a partner. I asked if I was not considered immediate family. There was a pause. She said, of course you are, it's just, you know, the seating is limited. The brunch invitation never came. By September, I had stopped being surprised. I had stopped asking questions. I had started noticing that every decision about the wedding was being filtered through Mark and his mother, and that my opinions were never solicited. I began to understand that my contribution, $90,000, had been accepted without any corresponding investment in my presence. I was a source of funds, not a source of honor. I was the man who wrote checks and then stood in the back. And I was supposed to be grateful for the privilege. But there was something I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't told Claire that I'd put the venue deposit in my name when she asked me to help with the initial payment before the wedding fund was set up. The contract was with me. The receipt for the full venue payment, $47,000, was in my name, and so was the open balance on the catering contract, a balance that I had not yet paid in full. I had written checks for the dress and the florist, but the venue and the catering were still technically mine to authorize. I had kept that detail to myself, not out of malice, but out of instinct. The instinct of a man who has built things his whole life and knows that the final payment is the one that gives you leverage. The week before the wedding, Claire called me. She said Mark's mother had decided to rearrange the seating chart. She said I would now be seated in the back row of the ceremony with the distant relatives and plus ones. She said it was for aesthetic symmetry. I asked, is this what you want? She said, it's what Mark wants. I said, what about what you want? She was silent. Then she said, I just want everyone to be happy. I knew in that moment that I had already lost something. But I also knew that I had a choice. And that is how I ended up on Saturday morning, October 14th, standing in the parking lot of the Crestwood Country Club, wearing a dark suit, holding a folded receipt in my pocket for $90,000, with my daughter about to walk down an aisle that I was not invited to sit near. I had not decided what I was going to do. I had only decided that I was not going to accept it quietly anymore. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that 10 feet inside that country club's main entrance, Mark and his mother had made one final change to the plan, a change that would make the receipt in my pocket feel like the only thing I had left. I walked through the main entrance of Crestwood Country Club at 10:15 that morning. The air smelled like flowers and polished wood. String music drifted from the courtyard. Guests in pastel suits and silk dresses stood in clusters holding flutes of champagne. I saw the seating chart mounted on an easel in the lobby, and that was the moment I understood what Mark and his mother had done. My name was not on the chart. Not in the back row, not in the second row, not anywhere. I traced the columns with my finger. The entire row of seats reserved for immediate family listed Mark's parents, his 2 siblings, and Claire's maid of honor's parents. There was no space for me, no card with my name. I had been removed from the ceremony entirely. I stood there for 30 seconds. A server asked if I wanted champagne. I said no. I watched the guests flow past me toward the courtyard, laughing, adjusting boutonnieres, smoothing dresses. I was invisible in the middle of a crowd, and then I saw Claire. She was standing at the far end of the lobby, near the entrance to the bridal suite, wearing a white robe over her dress. Her back was to me. Mark's mother was adjusting something on her shoulder. I walked over. As I approached, Mark's mother saw me first. Her face shifted from pleasant to something else, something that looked like mild inconvenience. She said, "Oh, you're here. We thought you might not come." I looked at Claire. She turned around. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. She said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. Mark told me he talked to you. He said you agreed to step back for the ceremony." I said, "He did not talk to me. I have not agreed to anything." Mark's mother stepped between us. She said, "This is not the time or place. Claire needs to focus. We can discuss this after the ceremony." I said, "There is no after the ceremony. I am her father. I am walking her down that aisle." Mark's mother smiled. It was the smile of someone who has already won. She said, "Actually, Claire has asked Mark's older brother to walk her down. We thought it would be less emotional for everyone." Claire looked at the floor. She did not correct her. She did not look up. I said, "Claire, look at me." She did not look. Mark's mother put a hand on Claire's arm and guided her toward the bridal suite. The door closed. I stood alone in the hallway. I did not leave. I walked to a bench near the lobby restrooms and sat down. I took out the folded receipt from my jacket pocket. $47,000 for the venue, $32,000 for catering, $9,000 for the dress. Total, $88,000 plus miscellaneous. I had given her $90,000. I had given her everything I had saved for 15 years, and she had traded me for a man who saw me as an aesthetic problem. I thought about my wife, her mother. I thought about the funeral, about standing in the rain with an 8-year-old holding my hand, about telling her that her mother was in heaven and that I would always be there for her. I had meant it. I had kept that promise for 22 years. And now, on the day she was supposed to start her own family, I was being told that my presence was not wanted, not just unneeded, actively unwanted. There is a difference, and that difference matters. I put the receipt back in my pocket. I stood up. I walked to the courtyard entrance. The ceremony was set to begin in 30 minutes. The chairs were arranged in perfect rows, white with ivory ribbons. An arch covered in roses stood at the front. Mark was already there, talking to his groomsmen, laughing, relaxed. He looked like a man who had gotten everything he wanted. I did not confront him, not yet. I found the wedding coordinator, a woman named Diane, and asked her where the groom's parents were seated. She showed me the front row, left side. I asked where the bride's parents were seated. She looked at her clipboard. There was a pause. She said, "The bride's mother has passed. The bride's father is not listed in the seating plan." I said, "I am the bride's father." Diane looked at me. She said, "I was told the bride would be walked by her uncle." I said, "I am aware of that, but I would like a seat, any seat, in the back." Diane looked uncomfortable. She said, "I need to check with Mrs. Mark's mother." She walked away. I waited. 5 minutes passed, 10. The guests began to take their seats. The string quartet tuned up. Diane did not return. I found a seat on the far end of the last row, next to a man I did not know. I sat down. I did not belong there, but I was not going to leave, not until I had seen my daughter walk down the aisle. The ceremony began. The bridesmaids came first, one by one in burgundy dresses, then the flower girl, then the ring bearer, then the music shifted. Everyone stood, and I saw Claire. She was standing at the far end of the aisle, her arm linked with Mark's older brother, a man I had met exactly twice. She looked beautiful. She looked terrified. She scanned the crowd as she walked, searching for something. When her eyes found me in the last row, her face changed. She faltered for half a step. Mark's brother steadied her. She looked away. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. I heard none of it. I watched the back of Claire's head. I watched Mark slip a ring onto her finger. I watched them kiss. I watched the crowd applaud. I could not clap. When it was over, the guests moved toward the reception hall. I stayed in my seat. The chairs emptied. The staff began clearing the aisle ribbons. I was alone in the courtyard, and then I made a decision. I would not go to the reception. I would not cause a scene. I would walk to my car, drive home, and I would call the venue's billing office on Monday morning. I would inform them that the remaining balance on the venue contract, the contract in my name, would not be paid. I had already paid the deposit. But the final payment of $23,000 was due in 30 days. I had the authority to stop it. I had the legal right, and I had the receipt in my pocket to prove it. But before I could stand, a hand touched my shoulder. It was Claire's maid of honor. She said, "Claire wants to see you in the bridal suite now." Her voice was tight. I followed her. The bridal suite was a small room off the main lobby, decorated with flowers and mirrors and half-empty glasses of champagne. Claire was standing in the center, still in her dress, holding her bouquet. She looked at me. She said, "Why did you come?" I said, "Because I am your father." She said, "You embarrassed me. Everyone saw you sitting in the back." Everyone knows you weren't part of the wedding party. People are talking. I said. I was not given a choice. I was removed from the seating chart without being told. I was told I was not welcome in the front row. I was told that Mark's brother would walk you down the aisle. I was told none of this by you. Claire's face hardened. She said, Dad, I love you, but Mark is my husband now, and his family is my family. They have a certain way of doing things. You don't understand because you've never been in that world. You don't know how things work. I said, I understand that I gave you $90,000. I understand that I built your childhood. I understand that I raised you alone. And I understand that you are telling me that I don't belong because I do not have a circular driveway. She flinched. She said, that's not fair. I said, that is the truth. She said, I did not ask you to pay for the wedding. You offered. I said, I did not offer to be removed from your life. She said, you are not removed from my life. You are at my wedding. You are just not in the ceremony. I said, there is a difference between attending a wedding and being welcomed at it. The door opened. Mark walked in. He looked at both of us. He said, everything okay in here? Claire said, it's fine. Mark looked at me. He said, I think you should leave. This is not the time for a family discussion. I said, I will leave when I am ready. Mark stepped closer. He said, I am asking you to leave. You are upsetting Claire. You are upsetting my mother. This is our day and you are making it about yourself. I said, I am not making it about myself. I am asking for basic respect. I am her father. I paid for this venue. I paid for this entire wedding, and I am being treated like an inconvenience. Mark laughed. It was a short, dismissive laugh. He said, you think paying for things gives you a say? That's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked. You gave us money. We thanked you, but the wedding is ours. The decisions are ours. You don't get to buy a seat at the table. I felt something inside me go very still. I said, I have the contract for the venue in my name. I have the receipt for the full payment. I have the authority to cancel the remaining balance. Mark said, you wouldn't do that. You love Claire too much. I said, you are correct. I do love Claire, but I also know that she is standing in this room watching you talk to her father like this, and she is saying nothing. Claire did not say nothing. She said, Dad, please just go. I will call you tomorrow, please. Her voice was shaking. I looked at her. I saw the little girl who scraped her knee. I saw the teenager who cried over a broken heart. I saw the woman who chose a man who would treat her father as a stranger, and I made my choice. I said, I am not going to the reception. I am going home. But before I leave, I want you to know something. I am not going to pay the remaining balance on the venue. I am not going to pay the catering balance. I am going to call the billing department on Monday, and I am going to inform them that the contract holder has withdrawn funding. What happens after that is between you and the country club. Mark said, you're bluffing. I said, I have never bluffed in my life. I turned and walked out. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Claire. She ran out in her wedding dress, bouquet still in hand. She grabbed my arm. She said, you can't do this. You can't cancel the venue. The reception is happening right now. There are 200 people here. I said, then you should have seated me at the table. She started crying. She said, I am so sorry. I should have stood up for you. I know I should have. But Mark and his mother, they have this vision. And I thought if I just went along, it would be easier. I thought you would understand. I thought you would forgive me. I said, I do forgive you, but I cannot absorb the cost of being treated as invisible. I cannot write a check to a wedding that erased me from its story. She said, what do you want me to do? I said, I want you to tell me right now in front of this building that you want me in your life, not as a benefactor, as your father. And I want you to tell Mark that his mother does not get to decide where I sit for the rest of our lives. Claire stood in the parking lot in her wedding dress, tears running down her face. The reception music drifted through the walls. She said, I can't do that right now, not today. It would ruin everything. I said, then you are not ready. I got in my car. I drove home. I did not look back. That was at 4:30 in the afternoon. By 7 o'clock that evening, my phone had 43 missed calls, 17 from Claire, 12 from Mark, 6 from Mark's mother, 5 from numbers I did not recognize, 3 from the country club's event coordinator. At 7:15, I called the venue's billing office. I left a message. This is the primary contract holder for the Crestwood Country Club wedding on October 14th. I am formally notifying you that I will not authorize the remaining balance. Please contact me to confirm receipt of this notification. At 9 o'clock, Claire texted, "Dad, please don't do this. The reception is falling apart. Mark's parents are furious. The country club is saying they will lock the doors if payment isn't secured by midnight. Please." I did not respond. I sat in my living room in the dark, staring at the receipt on the coffee table. I had won something, but I had also lost something, and I was not yet sure which one mattered more. The first call came at 7:30 the next morning. It was not from Claire. It was from the country club's general manager, a woman named Patricia, who introduced herself with the professional warmth of someone who has handled many wedding disasters. She said she had received my voicemail. She said she needed to confirm in writing that I was withdrawing payment authorization. I said I would send an email within the hour. She said, "Mr. Callahan, I want you to understand the implications. There is a reception currently in progress." Well, it was in progress. We stopped service at 11:15 last night when the guarantee was not met. The guests were asked to leave. The bride and groom were escorted to a side room. There was confusion. There were tears. Some guests are demanding refunds for travel expenses. I said nothing. She continued, "The contract is in your name. You are legally responsible for the balance. But if you refuse to pay, we will pursue legal action against the signatory. That is you. I want you to be aware of that before you send the email." I said, "I understand." I sent the email. I wrote, "I, Thomas Callahan, primary contract holder for wedding event at Crestwood Country Club on October 14th, do hereby formally withdraw authorization for payment of remaining balance. No further funds will be provided." I copied no one. I sent it. Then I turned off my phone. Did not turn it back on for 6 hours. When I did, I had 62 missed calls. The texts were unreadable. My voicemail inbox was full. I listened to the first message. It was from Claire. She was crying. She said the reception had been shut down, the guests had been sent home, the cake had not been cut, the dancing had not happened. Mark's mother had screamed at her in front of the wedding party. Mark had not defended her. She said, "You destroyed my wedding." I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Second message was from Mark. His voice was cold, controlled, deliberate. He said, "You think you've won, you haven't. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. I'm going to tell everyone that you abandoned your daughter on her wedding day. I'm going to tell your family. I'm going to tell your neighbors. I'm going to tell your church. You will be the man who ruined his daughter's wedding because he wasn't seated in the front row. That is your legacy now. Congratulations." He hung up. The third message was from Mark's mother. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Thomas, I understand you are upset, but what you have done is unforgivable. You have publicly humiliated our family. You have humiliated Claire. You have humiliated yourself. I want you to know that we will be contacting an attorney. We will be seeking damages for the emotional distress you have caused, and we will be telling everyone we know exactly who you are." She did not wait for a response. I sat in my kitchen. The sun was setting. I had not eaten all day. I looked at the receipt on the table, $90,000. I had paid 67 of it. The remaining 23 was the leverage I had used, but the cost was not measured in dollars. That night I called my sister Linda. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You were wrong." I said, "What?" She said, "Not about the seating, not about the money, but you should have told her before the wedding. You should have given her a choice. You should have said, 'If I am not treated as your father, I will not fund this event.' Instead, you waited until the moment of maximum damage. You made a point. But you also made an enemy of your own daughter." I said, "She made her choice." Linda said, "She made it without all the information. You held the information. That makes it a test, not a conversation, and tests destroy relationships." I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running the conversation with my sister over and over. She was right. I had not given Claire a clear ultimatum before the wedding. I had let her believe everything was fine. I had smiled and written checks and waited for the resentment to build until I could not contain it anymore. That is not strength, that is ambush. Monday morning, I drove to the country club. I walked into Patricia's office. I told her I would pay the remaining balance. She looked surprised. She said, "Are you certain? You sent the withdrawal notice." I said, "I am certain. I will pay it today, but I want the receipt. And I want a letter confirming that the balance has been settled in full." She printed the invoice. I wrote a check. The balance was $23,412. I wrote it without hesitation. I handed it to her. She said, "The bride and groom have not been in contact. Their belongings are still in the bridal suite. We have not heard from them since Saturday night. I said, that is not my problem. I took the receipt and the letter. I walked out. Drove to Claire's apartment. It was a small 2-bedroom unit on the west side of town. I had helped her with the security deposit. I had helped her furnish it. I had been there physically in that space, assembling an IKEA bookshelf while she complained about her roommate. That felt like a different life. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Claire opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. Her eyes were swollen. She looked at me like I was a stranger. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "I paid the balance on the venue. The wedding is fully funded. No one will come after you for the money." She said, "That's not what I wanted. I wanted you to be there. I wanted you to walk me down the aisle. I wanted you to be my father. Instead, you made it about a receipt." I said, "I made it about respect." She said, "You made it about control. You gave me money and then you used it to punish me when I didn't do what you wanted. That's not love, that's leverage." I said, "I asked for one thing, to be treated as your father, and you couldn't give me that." She said, "I was scared. Mark's family is intimidating. His mother has been planning this wedding for a year. I thought if I pushed back, I would lose everyone. I thought if I made her angry, she would turn Mark against me. I chose the path of least resistance. I am not proud of it, but you did not help. You waited until the worst possible moment to draw a line." I stood in her doorway. I wanted to say something that would fix it. I had nothing. She said, "I need space. I need time. I need you to stop calling and texting and showing up. When I am ready to talk, I will call you." I said, "How long?" She said, "I don't know." She closed the door. That was October 16th. I did not hear from her for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I heard from everyone else. Mark's mother sent a letter to my church. It was 2 pages long. It described me as a man who used financial leverage to emotionally abuse his daughter. The church elders called me in for a meeting. I explained my side. They were sympathetic but cautious. One of them said, "There are 2 sides to every story. Your daughter is not here to tell hers. That makes it difficult for us to take a position." I stopped attending services. My neighbor, a man I had known for 11 years, stopped waving. I saw him cross the street to avoid me. He had been at the wedding. I found out later that Mark's mother had called several of the guests and told them that I had intentionally sabotaged the reception because I was bitter about the seating. Some believed her. I lost friends I had known for decades. I became the subject of gossip at the grocery store, at the post office, at the diner where I had eaten breakfast every Saturday for 15 years. The waitress, a woman named Deb who had known my wife, looked at me differently. She asked, "Is it true you ruined your daughter's wedding?" I said, "I stopped paying for it." She said, "That's not what I heard." I said, "What did you hear?" She said that you walked out because you didn't get to sit in the front row. I said, "That is not the whole story." She said, "It's the story people are telling." I stopped going to the diner. Thanksgiving came. I spent it alone. I made a frozen turkey dinner. I watched football. I did not call Claire. She did not call me. I stared at the phone, waiting. It did not ring. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would say. I thought she would tell me I was too proud, that I should call my daughter, that love is more important than being right. But I could not yet. I was still too angry. December 2nd. That was the day everything shifted. I received a letter in the mail. The return address was an apartment in a city 2 hours away. I did not recognize the name. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper. It said, "Mr. Callahan, you do not know me. My name is Emma. I was a bridesmaid at your daughter's wedding. I have been trying to find a way to reach you. I was there when the reception was shut down. I saw everything. And I want you to know that what people are saying about you is not true. I saw the seating chart. I saw that your name was removed. I saw Mark's mother tell the coordinator to put you in the back and then remove you entirely when the coordinator suggested the groom's family would look better in photos. I saw Claire crying in the bridal suite before the ceremony. I heard Mark tell her that if she insisted on having you walk her down the aisle, he would call off the wedding. I heard Mark's mother tell Claire that you were emotionally unstable and that having you in the front row would trigger anxiety for the family. I was in the room. I heard it. I am telling you this because I have a father, and if someone did this to him, I would want someone to tell me. I do not know if it helps, but I wanted you to know that not everyone believes the story they are telling." She signed it with her phone number. I read the letter 4 times, then I called her. She answered on the first ring. She said, "I was hoping you would call." I said, thank you. She said, I have more. I have text messages. I have screenshots. Mark sent a group message to the wedding party 2 days before the wedding. It said, my mother thinks Claire's dad might cause a scene. If he shows up, do not engage. Let security handle it. I have it saved. I can forward it to you. I said, why are you doing this? She said, because Claire is my friend and she is being manipulated. She does not see it yet, but she will. And when she does, she will need someone who told the truth. I said, will you testify to what you saw? She said, I will. That was the moment the story changed, not because I had new leverage, but because I had proof that I was not the villain. I had a witness. I had text messages. I had documentation. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel: hope. I called Emma the next morning and asked her to meet me. She drove an hour and a half to a diner halfway between her city and mine. We sat in a booth by the window. She was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with the tired eyes of someone who had been holding a secret too long. She slid her phone across the table. The group message from Mark was still there. My mother thinks Claire's dad might cause a scene. If he shows up, do not engage. Let security handle it. The timestamp was October 12th, 2 days before the wedding. I read it 3 times. She also had screenshots of messages between Mark and his mother, forwarded from another bridesmaid. They discussed the seating chart in graphic detail. In one message, Mark's mother wrote, he's an embarrassment. He'll be in the back or not at all. I don't care if he paid. That's what he gets for thinking money buys him a place in our world. I finished reading. I looked at Emma. I said, will you share these publicly if I need you to? She said, I already have. I sent them to Claire last night. I did not expect that. I stared at her. She said, I told her I was coming to see you. I told her she deserved to know what her husband and her mother-in-law said behind her back. She hasn't responded yet, but she read them. I can see when messages are read. I said, what happens now? Emma said, now you wait. She knows the truth. What she does with it is her choice. I waited 3 days. On the 3rd day, Claire called me. Her voice was different, not angry, not crying, flat like someone who had used up all her emotional energy and was running on something else. She said, I read the messages, I read Emma's letter. I talked to 2 other bridesmaids, they confirmed everything. I said, I am sorry you had to find out that way. She said, I am sorry I believed them. I am sorry I let them convince me that you were the problem. I was scared, Dad. I was so scared of losing Mark, of losing his family, of being alone, and they used that fear to push you away. I said, where are you now? She said, I moved out. I am staying with Emma. Mark and I are separated. His mother has been calling me non-stop, leaving voicemails saying I am throwing away a good marriage because of a fight over a seating chart. But it's not about the seating chart. It's about the fact that he let his mother control our wedding. He let her erase you. And when I confronted him, he told me I was being dramatic. He told me to get over it. She paused. She said, I don't want to get over it. I want to be with my father. I drove to Emma's apartment that evening. Claire met me at the door. She was wearing a hoodie and no makeup. She looked younger, like the girl I raised. She hugged me for a long time. She said, I am so sorry. I said, I am sorry too. I should have told you before the wedding what I was planning. I should have given you a chance to choose instead of ambushing you. She said, you were pushed to the edge, I understand, but please don't ever do that again. Please talk to me first. I promised. Over the next month, things moved slowly. Claire filed for an annulment on grounds of fraud and duress. She had legal grounds. Mark and his mother had misrepresented their intentions regarding family inclusion. Emma and 2 other bridesmaids provided sworn statements. The annulment was granted in February. Mark's family fought it, but the evidence was clear. Claire kept the gifts. She did not keep the ring. I offered to help her with legal fees. She refused. She said she needed to stand on her own. She got a job at a marketing firm in the city, a 2-hour train ride from my house. She rented a small studio apartment. She started therapy, and slowly, week by week, we rebuilt our relationship. We started with phone calls, then Sunday dinners at my house, then a weekend trip to the lake where we used to go when she was a child. She told me she was learning to trust her own judgment again. She told me she had spent so long trying to please Mark and his mother that she had forgotten what she actually wanted. She said, I wanted you at my wedding. I wanted to walk down the aisle with you. I let them take that from me. I will never let anyone take that again. Months passed, spring came. The oak tree in my backyard leafed out. Claire came for Easter. She brought a casserole and a smile that looked real for the first time in a long time. We sat on the porch after dinner. She said, I want to do something. I want to have a small ceremony, just us, in the backyard. I want to renew my vows to myself, and I want you to be the only person there. I said I would be honored. She said, no payments, no contracts, just us. Held it on a Saturday in May. The backyard was simple: a white folding chair, a small table with a vase of wildflowers, the oak tree as the backdrop. Claire wore a simple white dress, not the one from the country club. She had sold that one. I stood in front of her wearing my navy button-down shirt, no suit. She said, I, Claire, take myself for who I am, for who I am becoming. I promise to honor my own voice, to trust my own instincts, to never again trade my family for approval. And I promise to always make space for my father, because he taught me what love really looks like. I cried, she cried. The neighbor's dog barked through the whole thing. It was perfect. Afterward, we sat on the porch steps, eating store-bought cake on paper plates. Claire said, there's something I haven't told you. That night after the reception was shut down, Mark's mother called the country club and tried to have the contract transferred to her name. She wanted to sue you for the remaining balance. The club told her they could not transfer the contract without the primary holder's signature. She was furious. She told the manager that you had ruined her social standing. The manager told me later that she had been blacklisted from hosting events there. The country club board reviewed the incident and decided that Mark's mother had violated their code of conduct by harassing staff and attempting to fraudulently assume a contract. She cannot host any event at Crestwood for 5 years. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed about the wedding. I said, she tried to steal the contract. Claire said, she tried, and she got caught. That was the final surprising detail. The woman who had orchestrated my exclusion had tripped over her own arrogance and landed on a blacklist. I did not need to punish her. The system did it for me. Claire moved back to our hometown in July. She rented a house 3 blocks from mine. She said she wanted to be close. She started a small gardening business. She comes over every Sunday for dinner. We watch baseball. We argue about politics. We laugh. I still have the receipt. It is tucked in the back of my nightstand drawer. I do not look at it often, but I keep it, not as a weapon, as a reminder that money cannot buy love, that respect cannot be invoiced, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is to draw a line and let them choose which side they stand on. Claire chose, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. That story could have ended differently. If I had spoken up before the wedding instead of waiting, if Claire had stood her ground earlier, if Mark and his mother had been capable of seeing a father as something more than an inconvenience. Any one of those changes would have rewritten the outcome, but they didn't. And what happened instead was a collision of pride, silence, and money that left everyone wounded. Here is what I learned. Financial contributions to family events are never just transactions. They carry weight, they carry expectation. And when those expectations are not spoken aloud before the check is written, they become landmines buried under good intentions. The research backs this up. Money is one of the most common sources of conflict in relationships. 7 in 10 married couples argue about finances. Add a wedding to that equation, and you have a pressure cooker with a timer. But the deeper question is not about the money. It is about what happens when someone uses financial leverage as a substitute for a difficult conversation. That is what I did. I held the receipt like a weapon because I did not know how to say, I am afraid of losing you. I hid behind contracts because it felt safer than vulnerability. And in doing so, I nearly lost the thing I was trying to protect. Claire and I rebuilt. It took months of awkward phone calls, honest apologies, and the painful work of relearning trust. Not everyone gets that chance. Some families fracture permanently over wedding disputes. The conflict becomes a scar that never heals. That almost happened to us. It did not, because Emma spoke up, because Claire was brave enough to look at the evidence, and because I was willing to admit that I had been wrong about my own method. The receipt is still in my nightstand. I look at it sometimes and remember the weight of that afternoon in the country club parking lot. But I also remember the Sunday dinners that followed, the backyard ceremony under the oak tree, the sound of my daughter's voice when she said, I want to be with my father. If you are carrying a receipt of your own, a grudge, a silence, a check you wrote that came with invisible strings, ask yourself what you actually want. Not to win, not to be right, to be connected. Because in the end, that is the only contract that matters, and it cannot be cancelled by a phone call. If this story hit close to home, Subscribe for more real stories about family, money, and the lines we draw. I will see you in the next one.